I'm very excited to show you the game of Levon Aronian playing with the white pieces against VISHY Anand. It's Wijk aan Zee 2013, the famous Hoogovens tournament, or as it's called nowadays, Tata Steel Chess. And we are going to see one of the greatest games ever played in this little town in the Netherlands. Look at this, it's gonna be very short. Fasten your seatbelts. And we're looking at this game from the black side. Aronian starts with the move 1d4. Vishy goes for d5, and after c4, c6. We have the Slav opening, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e3, knight bd7, all pretty standard. And we get to see the famous Miran variation, which is something Vishy has employed on multiple occasions, winning some brilliant games with it. After bishop d3, now the bishop is developed and it's time to take the pawn on c4 now. White needs to waste another move with his bishop to recapture the pawn. And black goes for the move b5. Hits the bishop on c4. Bishop goes back to d3. And here, interesting moment, because in 2008, 5 years prior to this game, Vishy Anand played the move a6 and won two very important games against Vladimir Kramnik in their World Championship match in Bonn. But here, in 2013, he goes for the move bishop d6. Castling kingside, so does black. Queen c2 and bishop b7. So when we are looking at this position, we understand that this bishop is not doing much yet. But if you do get the possibility to open up the diagonal with the move c5, this bishop can come alive very, very fast. So now we understand better the idea behind White's next move, as White played here the move a3. So the idea is to play the move b4 next. And when the pawn is on b4, it will be much harder for black to get in the move c5, because both the pawn on b4 and d4, they are covering that square. In multiple games, black has opted here for the move a5 to make it harder for White to play the move b4. But here Vishy goes for the move rook c8. He has plans with his rook on the c-file. And here, maybe a small surprise, White didn't play here the move b4, which is considered to be one of the main lines, but nowadays this is considered to be pretty equal because of some forcing sequence starting here with the move c5. I'm not going to bother you with all the computer analysis there, but tactically this seems to be working because the rook is excellently placed, opposing pressure against that queen. So instead, Aronian doesn't want to enter a forced line. He plays here the move knight g5. That's an ambitious move, but very interesting moment as well, because first of all, he does hit the pawn on h7 now with the knight as well as with the queen and bishop. So you would expect black to respond with the move h6 to kick the knight. But in that case, the knight goes to e4, attacks the bishop, and White now does gain control over the c5 square with its knight. And so the bishop on b7 will remain out of play. This is considered to be better for White. So h6 is not played. There's actually also a possibility here to win a pawn as black with a typical tactic. Bishop takes h2 was also not played in the game, because after king takes knight g4, you do win back the knight on g5, but after king g1, queen takes g5, White first kicks the knight away, knight goes back, and now with the move b4, you're locking up this bishop on b7, and next, White's going to play e4 with tremendous play in the center, with the bishop pair, with the pawn center. This is looking great for White. So now, Vishy is very well prepared as always. Played here the move c5 anyway. And that's very interesting because he just leaves the pawn on h7. And White says, okay, I'm gonna take that pawn. He can choose to take with the bishop, with check, and after king h8, also a lot of complicated lines will arise. But Aronian played here the move knight takes h7. Attacking the knight, attacking the rook. What is black going to do? You don't want to take on h7 because then the bishop is going to take the knight. Look at this, knight g4. You're ignoring the threat, and the rook on f8 can be taken. But if you do that, there's bishop takes h2 with check. When the king goes into the corner, now we understand that the queen is able to join the attack with devastating effect. It's going to be checkmate in a few moves. So the rook on f8 cannot be taken here. What should white do instead? Well, maybe move like h3 can be played to kick the knight. Probably then you're gonna play bishop h2 after king h1, queen h4. Black seems to be doing okay here. One of the ideas is that you may just drop back with the bishop at some point, after which queen takes h3 is a threat, because the pawn on g2 is pinned. Well, complicated lines. This was still part of the preparation of Vishy Anand. Instead, white played the move f4, so that the bishop on d6 doesn't hit the pawn on h2 any longer. But now, c takes d4 is played. So you're attacking the knight on c3. And well, even if white would take that rook on f8, you take back with the bishop, for instance, and if you take back now, you're an exchange down, but the knight comes into play. There are ideas to take with the queen on d4. Black's pieces are just so much better placed looking at the white king. This is incredibly dangerous for white. So instead of taking the rook, white just recaptured first on d4. Very logical move. And one of the key points is that a move like queen h4, threatening checkmate, can just still be met by the move g3, attacking the queen. And look at this queen on c2. It defends the pawn on h2, so white is still in control. But Vishy has a much stronger idea in mind. He's not going to do something about his rook. He's looking for his own opportunities. And he played here an incredible idea. Bishop c5. This is probably a move we would not have thought about in about 100 years. This is just absolutely insane. So the point is that if you do take the bishop, then the knight comes into play and hits the bishop on d3. For instance, if you take the rook now, it's queen d4 check, first forcing the king to go into the corner. Then you take with the knight on d3. And at this point, you're a rook down, but there are very strong threats. Look at this, knight is coming to f2. So after something like h3, creating some space for your king, then it's knight check, rook takes, knight takes, king goes to h2, for instance, and finally we can take that knight, and you see that black has regained all the material with more active pieces. This is still looking great for him. But this is, of course, a very deep idea. After bishop c5, Aronian didn't take that bishop. He decided to drop back with the bishop to e2 to attack the knight on g4, that very dangerous attacker. And here, another absolutely insane idea, because you would expect black to take the pawn with check. What can be wrong with capturing an opponent's piece with gain of time? But after king h1 only, black is a little bit better. After the move bishop e2, Vishy want to get the most out of the position, and instead he played another piece sacrifice. Knight from d7 comes to e5. An absolutely brilliant shot as it opens up the file for the queen. If you do take the knight on e5, it's queen takes d4 with check. If the king goes into the corner, we have the famous queen g1 leading to smothered mate. After white captures with the rook, it's knight f2, checkmate. So taking the knight is not possible. Also, if you take the bishop now, it's queen d4 check. King goes into the corner. Now you have knight f2. If the king goes back, you have knight h3 and queen g1 leading to checkmate again. And if you do take on f2 with your rook, it's queen takes, and there's not much you can do against the mating threat. If you do move the bishop, well, then you also got to think about back rank mate ideas, or even the queen on c2 is just hanging. So after knight d e5, look at this. Bishop takes g4 was played. Now, first things first, take the pawn on d4 with check. So the king goes into the corner, and only now we take back with that knight. This is the main point. That knight from d7 is now in the attack again. White played here the move knight takes f8, grabbing the rook. And that's a interesting and very logical move, of course. And I think VISHY wished also that he could just bring the queen into the attack with queen h4. This is almost checkmate, but there's only one defensive move, and that is queen h7. You're giving back some material, but you're avoiding the checkmate because black is obliged now to accept the exchange of queens. So rather than bringing the queen into the attack, you gotta do something about this move queen h7, and that's what VISHY did. He played this move f5. Fantastic idea. This knight is not running away. If it does take the pawn on e6, it's queen h4. Threatening checkmate on h2. If you play h3, take the pawn anyway, because this pawn on g2 is pinned. It cannot capture the queen because of that huge bishop. Now we understand how important it was to get in this move c5 before launching an attack. This bishop plays a major role in the attack. Back to the game. Instead of taking the pawn, knight g6 was played, so the knight covers the h4 square. The queen cannot go there, so it goes to f6 instead. It hits the knight. That's very logical. Now, if you do go with your knight to e5, white is, let's say, trying to save it, offering the exchange of knights, that would be a huge blow to black's attacking concept. You cannot allow white to do that. But here, the big idea is there's another sacrifice. Knight takes h2, removing the pawn on the h file, because, well, that's a very important defender. Now, there's not much you can do against the queen coming to the h file. With a discovered check, this is going to be checkmate because the bishop covers the g1 square. If you do take the knight, it's queen h4, checkmate. So, knight e5 is not possible. The knight cannot go anywhere. White play the move h3, hits the knight on g4, but after queen takes g6, you understand that h takes g4 is not possible because of checkmate on the h file with the queen, thanks to the beautiful bishops. So the knight is not taken. White played instead a move queen e2, moving the queen more to the center, getting out of the c file, so the knight is no longer pinned. But a simple move here is queen h5. Fantastic idea, renewing the threat of queen takes h3. There's not much white can do against it. Even if you would take the pawn on e6, that's just one check. You just move the king away, and the threat against the white king still remains. You see that white is under severe pressure here, and he's only an exchange up, but all black's pieces are looking fantastic. What should white do? Well, his position is pretty bad. Probably the only move here is to block the diagonal. So with the move rook f3, you're protecting the pawn on h3. But here you can win back all the material. Bishop takes, queen takes, knight f2, check. And if you do take, if you play the move king h2, then you take on f3, g takes, and such an endgame with so much active pieces and a lot of pressure on white's queen side. This is just technically winning. This is what white should have done, but thanks to Levon Aronian, he made another blunder, and that's good because that's how this game ended up in the history books. He, instead of playing rook f3, he decided to play queen d3 to protect the pawn on h3. So white cannot play the move queen takes h3 yet, but you understand that white's position is almost collapsing. It's just dependent on the queen, which protects the pawn with one beautiful interference move. Bishop e3. It's just game over. There's nothing white can do against the threat of queen takes h3. If you do take there on e3, it's queen takes h3 with check. Now, black's dark squared bishop is no longer on the board, so king g1 is still possible. But then it's queen takes g2 with checkmate. After bishop e3, Levon Aronian resigned on move 23. Something you don't really often see at the very highest level. One of the most amazing games ever played in Wijk aan Zee. I hope you liked it, and let me know in the comments what you think, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for doing that. See you soon.